Welcome to Minority Focus. I'm your host, Jimmie Moore. As usual, sorry, had to throw that in. We've got a really good show for you today. It's something that should be of interest to all of us in American society. Joining us today, after my bundling, scheduling the show some time ago, is Mary Foley. You're the director.
I am.
Of the Merryman House.
Sometimes that's easier to claim than others, but yes, I am the director.
But you used to do a show here about
the Merryman House, yes.
Merryman House. Has that been very long ago?
You know, it's probably been longer than I realized. Time passes so quickly, but it's certainly a great platform to get good information out. So I appreciate the viewers for joining today. Okay,
glad to have you. Really glad to have you. It's been some time, I know, or I've read, since Merryman House started. And I don't want to go back and rehash anything that you may have, but even if I did, it would still be a good thing, right?
Yes, it's good information to share.
I've read that Merryman House was started in 1978. Yes. Because you wasn't around then, was you?
I was 2 years old, so I'm going to hope people aren't too quick on their feet with the math. But we have been around, going on our 40th year coming up next year. So Merryman House is not new to the community, but it seems like no matter how long we are here, folks are still learning about us and what we do, and have to be willing to look at what we do and consider the issue of domestic violence and how it affects our community.
Right. I can't begin to imagine how the stages or the steps that the Merryman House program has grown. But I know that once upon a time it was not what it is now, as far as the size, the services, and all of that.
You know, back in its inception, I think, you know, if you're ever able to just really sit down with Merryman Kemp, who is our founder and still active in the Merryman House, when you're able to hear her reflect back on how the Merryman House got its start and why it was important, you know, in short, they saw a need for safe houses all over the community. Domestic violence was real and it was happening, and women and children primarily had nowhere to go when those things would happen. And so a group of concerned citizens got together, of course led by Merryman Kemp, and they opened up their personal homes to be safe houses to house women and children who needed it. Right. And then as it went on, you know, and funding became available and the state legislature started to look at funding programs like the Merryman House, and its funding came along, so did then its services grew out of that funding.
That's a giant leap forward. I'm really sure that everyone involved is pleased with how it's developed. The people that open their own homes here, we're talking local people here in Paducah, that would actually open their homes to someone that's in trouble, I'll say.
You know, and I've thought about that before. You know, would I be willing to do that now? Because I'm sure then, you know, it was just as uncharted and probably even more so we didn't talk about it. And I think about their courage, their willingness to align themselves with an issue that was very much in the dark, very much not something that we would want to talk about. The danger that went with it. So some of the protection comes in knowing what we're dealing with. And in that time, they would not have had that. So just to think about their courage and their self-sacrifice to say, hey, I've got an extra bedroom, or I've got to come on into my home, stay here, and I'm going to do what I can to help you, was a great testament to the courage of some of our early founding mothers and what they did to make the way better for all of us.
Right. Not that there wasn't any type of screening done back then, but as compared to now, what is the screening process now for the people that come?
To the Merryman House specifically? Yes. You know, the Merryman House has a 24-hour hotline that is it's available 24 hours a day in a 24-hour emergency shelter. So folks can call that hotline number and we will begin that assessment process. So essentially we serve all victims of domestic violence, no matter what time they were victimized, and it doesn't matter if that abuse is still going on or if it's, you know, has been in the past. So it's not whether they would qualify for services, but probably more accurately, which services would they best qualify for. So when most people think of the Merryman House, they think of a shelter.
Yes.
That's what we're synonymous
Yes.
with.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true. We will always remain true to that heartbeat of that safe house approach. And so if folks need to qualify for the shelter, they need to be fleeing domestic violence. So there needs to have been a recent incident for which they're fleeing, or a dangerous situation that has just occurred that they're needing a way out. Mm-hmm. And we work to accommodate them to get them that shelter. If they're not what we call fleeing imminent domestic violence or danger, but they are needing help for some of the symptoms or consequences of being in a domestic violence relationship, then there are a whole host of other services. And that can look like meeting in one of our 4 outreach offices. We have one in Marshall, one in Graves, Callaway, and Paducah, with a case manager, support groups, housing stabilization, economic justice, financial assistance, just all of the things that come when you're dealing with domestic violence. It's a comprehensive problem, and Merryman House offers a comprehensive support.
Those services that you mentioned that are in the other counties in our area, everything that's needed for a start to getting help is available in those counties. There's a contact there for it.
There is. So sometimes folks get confused and they think that they are standalone offices. They are all connected to the Merryman House. It's just that our home office, our shelter operations are in Paducah. But Merryman House arms, if you would, extend to the 8-county purchase region. So we are the state designated contract provider for the 8 counties.
Well, some years ago, there was a house, a large house in Paducah on a corner, and I always heard that it was a shelter for battered wives, whatever. I never knew. I never saw anyone going in and out and about and what have you. That being as it was, how is security for the new place that you've moved into?
Well, that is the $1,000,000 question, Jimmy. What are we going to do on the new campus? And it's getting a lot of attention. And I think to understand maybe why we're going the way that we're going, we really have to be able to acknowledge from where we've come and with the way in which the issue of domestic violence has changed over the years. So as we were talking earlier, I think when we think back to the late 70s, early 80s, and programs there weren't any, right? That's how maybe underground this issue was. There weren't any formal domestic violence programs.
You don't mean that literally.
I guess I don't mean it literally, but I think about a world in my lifetime that was dealing with an issue like domestic violence, but there were no programs to respond. Right. And so at that time, we knew little about the crime. We knew it was lethal. We knew it was dangerous. We didn't even have mandatory reporting laws then. And so the issue of anonymity and security and safety looked very different. And now, it doesn't mean that the issue of domestic violence is any less lethal or any less dangerous, but I do think that we have to think about it differently. And if we want clients to be able to access us, and if we want the community to be able to stand and respond and say, this is the type of community that we want to live in, then we have to be able to bring not only the issue of domestic violence, but the response to domestic violence a little more into the light. So I think that the board of directors would let me speak on their behalf to say that safety and security will always be central to the Merryman House. We will always make sure that safety is our #1 priority. But I do think we're learning to walk this tightrope, if you would, of how can we make sure people are safe and not anonymous? How can we make sure they are protected through confidentiality, but yet they're able to decide, if they want to be out or not? And so the way that the board will handle security on the new campus is with that as a governing principle, that the issue has changed in our knowledge of it. The issue is dangerous, but the community is ready to have a dialogue. And so there will be gated control in and out of the campus. There will be security on the buildings as appropriate. We will continue those partnerships with law enforcement that we have. But I think that the Merryman House has come to a place where, in order to save, build, and change lives in a very dramatic and effective way, we've got to push out into the forefront and let the community know we're here, and we are committed to excellence, and we want to begin to develop a comprehensive integrated care campus for trauma survivors that isn't just the Merryman House, but that it's all of these different pieces that come together to put people on their journey to healing. And I don't think we can do that if we remain hidden.
For sure. On the matter of security and what have you, one thing I reminded myself before we came today was not to blurt out its location, its present location. Did I decide wisely?
I think so. You know, I think we're not to the new campus yet, and so we certainly do want to remain wise, right, in those that we serve, given the setup of our current location and all the obstacles that sometimes we have to navigate being where we are. But I do think that, you know, folks have known, and it's been published, you know, in the media, that we're moving to the 435 Burger Road location where the Board of Education used to be. It's a beautiful campus. We're really excited about the future.
Yes, that's a pretty big place. That was it was utilized in the past as a drug alcohol rehabilitation center. It also had a psychiatric unit, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. The Goodman House. So I can talk about it now, right?
Yes, you can. Yes,
big
you
Goodman
can.
House up on the hill, and then the way things are there. It's a campus. It's like
it is a campus, and it's going to take a village, right, to be able to operate it, which I think is the most exciting part. You know, Merryman House purchased 13 of those acres, and Mountain Comprehensive Care purchased 13 of those acres. So we will share that campus together. We will remain our own entities, but Mountain Comp will be providing on-site residential substance abuse services.
You're saying Mountaintop?
Mountain Comp. Mountain Comprehensive
Okay.
Care.
Okay.
Yeah, they do behavioral health, substance abuse, a whole host of things. But for us, they will have a 16-bed residential substance abuse treatment facility for women, an intensive outpatient for substance abuse treatment, and some behavioral health services. And then we, of course, will be providing the trauma services that we always have. And our vision would be that we would be very strategic and creative in sharing that campus with partners that already serve similar clients. Maybe it's at-risk youth, maybe it's other types of victimization, maybe it's pulling together just services that our clients utilize, and really working at this in a more efficient and effective way.
Are there agencies, other agencies that are tied to or work with or intermingle with, what have you? Four Rivers, for example, behavioral health. Are the other agencies in constant communication? They know.
I mean, I think the community is learning about the Merryman House's vision for that campus, and we will be actively looking for partners that are collaborative and that share our like-minded mission. I think when we think about trauma and we think about victimization and the subsequent issues that come from that, we've got to be smarter, I think, about how we're going at the problem. And so, you know, our state is facing an opioid crisis. You know, we hear about that from the governor and from local leaders and law enforcement. And you can't help but look at the statistics of trauma and interpersonal violence. And if you just look at the intersection between those two things, and then homelessness, you know, coming in, mental illness, when you look at those things, what I think you find, not all the time, but often, is that interpersonal violence is a root somewhere. Childhood trauma, rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse and neglect, you know. And so I think as we learn and as the research informs us, we know that we each have a job to do. One person can't do the whole job, but we have overlap in so many places that I just can't help but think it's time that we start doing this better, more collaboratively, more comprehensively. I was stunned to read that over 90% of individuals who are in treatment for substance abuse have an interpersonal violent history. So that overlap, I think, it can no longer be ignored. So we can't just treat substance abuse and just treat trauma. We have to treat them together.
For sure. I just watching television, reading newspapers and what have you, often heard that you know, I've heard people say, and I've thought, in all truth and honesty, about the woman who allows this sort of thing to go on and on before they finally go get help somewhere. But you know, and you mentioned the violent aspect of it. Sometimes I see it as a beautiful human being that doesn't know how to respond to that kind of garbage. And it's not about necessarily about getting beat up. It's about being dominated, dictated to, talked to a certain way, and all of that, you know, like that. So it's not necessarily always about violence. It's about somebody being taken advantage of in a mean kind of way.
You know, domestic violence is really rooted in power and control. And then the way that the perpetrator accomplishes that power and control might be through physical abuse, might be through sexual abuse, might be through financial control, might be through isolation, might be through emotional abuse. So the tools are vast. And we have to broaden our thought about what domestic violence looks like and what it doesn't look like. Your point, and I hear it so often, you know, why doesn't she just leave? You know, why does she go back? And gosh, that's my big one, because what I want to say is we would not say that to any other crime. We don't say to somebody whose car gets broken in at Walmart, well, you know, you were parking in row F, the third space back, and don't you know everybody who parks in that space, they get their car robbed. We don't do that. But when it comes to interpersonal violence, we need to find a way to blame or make it the victim's fault.
I've also read that one of the main reasons is because women will say, I don't have anything else. I have nothing else. I don't have anywhere to go. And that's where you come in, right?
Absolutely. The number one reason why people stay is financial in nature.
Yeah.
So Merryman House looks to remove those barriers. And what I'd like to say to the victims listening, whether they're men or women, is it's really not about why you stay. It's what can we do to help you escape?
Right.
Because it's a very different paradigm when you think about somebody having to escape versus leave.
Right. That led to another question that I had in mind. Not intending by any means to show any sympathy towards some of us low down, dirty, rotten old men folk. But do you get men?
Yes.
Do men come?
Yes. We serve much less proportionate. It's an 87% proportionate, or disproportionate, I should say, crime against women. Okay. So, but we do serve men. We serve usually between 10 and 20 a year. Some we shelter, some we're just working with in outreach. So the Merryman House serves victims of domestic violence. We do not discriminate based on gender or anything else. And so if you are a victim, a man or a woman, we're going to make sure that you get accommodations. And I would say one of the most lethal cases that I can remember was an elderly gentleman who had been in an abusive relationship for nearly 35 years. And when he came to us, you know, my eyes were again opened to the fact that this is a human crime, and we have to respond to it that way.
What was the percentage you just gave? 80?
It's 87% disproportionate to women. So you're going to be much more likely to be a victim of domestic violence just by the fact that you're a female. But there are male victims. Well,
with domestic violence being predominantly in women, it makes me wonder how long it applied to men folk before, because a man is far less apt to go to somebody and tell them, you know, the wife is abusing them or whatever. But it happens. It really,
yes.
It
yes,
really
and
does.
this gentleman talked about all the different times that law enforcement would be called to the home by a neighbor, and he talked with me about how he would keep that from being disclosed, and how he just didn't feel like he could, and he felt ashamed. He felt like, what was he going to do? He didn't know how to respond, and the wounds that he had on him when he came to us were devastating, and have been going on for years.
Right. Merryman House tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. Do you see where? Okay, how far are you in obtaining the property. I don't want to keep saying the name.
Yeah, we are on the property.
Okay.
Clients are not on the property yet. Administration and outreach staff are on the property. Clients will be moving over before this year ends. So we are on, actually contractors are ahead of schedule. We are required to be on the property by the end of the year, but it'll be before then. Cool. And we'll be growing to a 36-bed shelter instead of a 24-bed shelter. So we're excited about that. So Merryman House tomorrow, next week, next year is moving forward. We are growing and expanding, and I hope when my tenure comes to an end as the director that folks will be able to look back and say we weren't afraid to take the risks that we needed to take, not for the sake of taking them or for anybody getting the glory out of them, but our victims have been telling us for a long time what they need, and we have to rise to that occasion, and we have to hear them. It's the least we can do.
Is Ms. Kemp still active?
She is. She is a board member emeritus, so she comes when she can. She is the chair of our Capital Campaign Committee, which is now in its public phase. We are in the middle of a capital campaign to raise $3.7 million. We are $3.2 million of the way there, so a little over, what is that, about 86% of the way. So we've still got a little ways to go. But yeah, she's involved and reminds us often.
That's great. I just did some reading recently about it, and that face that I saw when I started reading is a face that I used to see very often on a job I used to work at. And
she just turned 80. We just had a birthday party for her. So
I read about the birthday party.
She just turned 80.
I saw that. That's wonderful. And even I'm sorry to say, at that age, I don't. It's wonderful that people still keep going, that believe in something, about it, and not the on the porch or on the corner talking kinds of people about what needs to be done. But that had to have been a heck of an endeavor for her to start that, or from ground floor. And are any other people still involved that were? We do keep in touch with some board members that were the original board. Many of those folks came to her birthday party, and and they still stay in touch with us. And so, Merryman, one thing I would give her such applause for is, she knows the vision, she knows why we started, and she remains true to that. She's not afraid to change with the times, but hold fast to the mission. Right. And one of the things that she told me one time is she said, I don't feel like Merryman House ever has fully grown up, and I'm ready for it to fully grow up. And when we had her birthday party on the new property, she said, I think we're about to grow up. And I said, I think you're right. And she said, don't ever be afraid to make the powers that be angry. For sure.
But she said, respect the powers that be when you need to, but don't ever be afraid to push against them. And I've never forgotten that, and I believe that there's truth to that.
How'd you come on board? How'd you get here? How'd you get on board?
Yeah, well, so I used to be the director of another nonprofit in our community for about, I think, 7 years, and have always enjoyed serving victims of crime has been my passion, and where I've spent most of my career. And in all honesty, and this is not a joke, I uploaded my resume on accident to Monster, and I got a call that this position was looking to be filled, and went and met with the folks to hear more about it. And after just a lot of prayer and thought and talking with my husband, felt like maybe this was something I needed to give a try. So I came on about 6 years ago. Your husband, I bet you Russ don't even raise his voice in your house. Bless his heart, he doesn't even get to get a word in sometimes. Jimmie just sits back and listens. He's a very quiet man.
That's good. It's a wonderful thing that you do. People don't, a lot of people, women, don't have a clue. They just stay in the circumstance. But for them to understand that there is, looked up an old song this morning, and a line in it said, I believe that somewhere in the great somewhere, there is a God. No, I didn't say it as God, but it said there is someone who will help. There is someone who will help them, and there's help.
Yes.
Women don't have to do this.
Oh no.
And then when that happens, unfortunately, the children that watch, it does all sorts of things that you can't even think about it. That that's going to affect them.
Absolutely.
Them later, and you never go back to look at why is he acting this way or why is she acting that way. It's because they see this.
Absolutely.
Is it almost like if a kid sees, if a young girl sees dad beat mom up and mom take it, that girl decides that's what she's supposed to do?
It is certainly a cyclical process. So we know that it does perpetuate through generations. We know that kids that are exposed to domestic violence are much more at risk for all sorts of issues, behavioral problems, mental health issues, physical problems. So it's very serious. The Merryman House does have a youth advocate that works with our kids, but you know, they are not what we used to call years ago a secondary victim. What we now know is children who are exposed to domestic violence are just as much a victim as mom, if it's a woman in that case. It's very serious. So all of our services are free of charge. Our goal is to remove any barrier that is in the way of somebody leaving an abusive relationship. So we work with schools, we work to get documentation reestablished, we work to get folks relocated. We will do whatever we can within our power to help folks break free from that cycle.
Right. I'm an ID addict, the picture on TV, and a lot of that sometimes ends in death for someone, and that's scary. Appreciate you coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you
for
so
having
very
me.
much, and maybe we'll talk again sometime
I would love that.
about it after I can just go ahead and blab off at the mouth about where you are now and
You
everything.
can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
For Minority Focus, I'm Jimmie Moore.